本师释迦牟尼佛，南无本师释迦牟尼佛，南无本师释迦牟尼佛。So now we have covered the most important elements of the shamatha meditation as explained in the northern tradition, the 9 so-called abodes of mind in shamatha. Now we have also discussed this explanation of shamatha is quite different from what you find in the Abhidhamma tradition or Abhidharma tradition based on the agamas. And we are emphasizing the importance of the study of agamas. Actually, when you study more the agamas and when you study more the teaching of the early teachers of the northern tradition, you will find that their inspiration actually comes from the agamas. Now, the idea of shamatha and vipassana, as all ideas in our history, is changing. We beings, we are a process of the change. World is a process of the change. So you will find the same words used in the northern tradition, especially in Tibet, and the words we use in the agamas, in early Buddhism, they acquire quite different meanings. So we have explained that the shamatha in the Abhidhamma tradition is the practice of the 8 kinds of, we can call it absorption or dhyanas or attainments, tengzhi, depends what aspect we investigate, or we can also call it 8 kinds of samadhi. Learning Buddhism, we have to learn, in fact, 10 types of samadhi. This is emphasized in all the, Abhidharma based on the agamas. We have to know the 8 kinds of samapati. We have to know the Wei Tao Ti, the proximate samadhi. In the northern Buddhism, they also talk about the samadhi in the sphere of the dominated by the senses, the Yi Jie Ting. Then we have to know the samadhi of Vipassana, which investigates the momentariness of all the compounded phenomena. This is where, when we see it, this is actually the gate to realization, as explained in the agamas. It is through investigating the momentary appearance and disappearance of the phenomena, and all phenomena, as we have learned, are summarized as 5 aggregates. Of course, also the 12 spheres, 18 elements, they actually only extend the meaning of the 5 aggregates, all explaining the fact of non-self nature of our experience. When we penetrate this non-self nature of our experience, through the worldly understanding, we are attuned to the supermundane understanding. When we understand the dependent origination, we are no more, so to say, the ignorant ones. We become the noble putujana, the noble fangfu. This is the same teaching in all the traditions. Then we are open for the realization, for the direct seeing of the ultimate reality. And when we see directly the ultimate reality, everything becomes different. Then this world ceases to be real. And this why this experience is so important. It changes the nature of consciousness. Now we have explained in the northern tradition this practice of shamatha, and even the practice of vipassana is explained by different means. And in fact, all this is directly or indirectly based with the explanation we find in the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra. It is of this work, to whomever you attribute it, whether to Bodhisattva Maitreya or to Asanga, his disciple. This work is of utmost importance for understanding the development of meditation in the northern Buddhism, in China, in Tibet. Finally, all agree that the only way to realize is to practice shamatha and vipassana, but the explanation becomes quite different. And in order to understand why, we want to know a little bit, because it is very complex. We want to know a little bit the background for this understanding of explanation of shamatha and vipassana as it is in the northern tradition. The shamatha being the 8 dwellings of the mind in shamatha, which we have explained. You do not need necessarily to practice the dhyanas to attain them. Of course, if you practice, it will be very helpful. And then the 4 steps of vipassana, based on the absorption of the wisdoms through hearing, wisdom through contemplation, and wisdom through meditation. We don't have much time to refer to it in detail, but our explanation of the Anapanasati also is related to this. So in order to understand this difference, we can briefly mention, I have started mentioning in the beginning, the 4, well actually the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra explains in the Shravaka Bhumi, in the explanation of the practice of the disciples, explain the 16 objects a disciple should be familiar with in order to attain the realization. And the 16 objects, in some way or another, we will find in the background you will still find the idea of the suchness being the ultimate reality. Suchness is what is to be attained. And the suchness is one. We have emphasized that. Everything is suchness. What we experience in the world is suchness. What we experience beyond the world is suchness. And the object of shamatha and vipassana, finally, for those who want to attain the highest, becomes the suchness itself, one truth, non-dual truth. Actually, we cannot say that this is radically different from what you find in the agamas. You can also, in a way, find these passages supporting this view in the agamas themselves. Now, this understanding of these 16 objects for shamatha and vipassana does not mean that we practicing the shamatha and vipassana, all we have to know is 16 objects. No, we can know many, many other objects, and they are also mentioned, but these are most important ones. Same like in the Southern tradition, you will see the objects of shamatha summarized as 40 or 38, depends. It does not mean that there are only 40 or 38 objects of shamatha. You can use many, many more objects, even objects from other religions to get into the shamatha. Why not? But the emphasis of the Buddhism is, in order to understand the ultimate reality, we have to be very clear that ultimate reality has to be beyond grasping. We have mentioned that. So this is, in a way, the ultimate yoga, because in yoga, finally, the most praised principle is the ahimsa, the non-violence. And the explanation of the ultimate reality as something beyond grasping is of extreme importance. This is actually the deepest understanding of the principle of non-violence, being the highest principle of yoga. Actually, the non-violence is the highest force, is a highest force uniting all the virtues. And when one understands Buddhism, this is what should be emphasized. Now, let's come back to these 16 objects. When you study Yogacara Bhumi Shastra, and it is very rewarding to study it, because it is kind of an encyclopedia of this whole tradition of Shamatha Vipassana, in the northern tradition. Also, the greatest part of it is based on the agamas, not on the Mahayana sutras. Of course, on the agamas in the northern tradition. And this Yogacara Bhumi Shastra quotes some sutra called the Revata Sutra, which you will not find in southern tradition, you will not find in northern tradition, pointing out actually there were many, many compilations of the sutras. Many, many. Maybe each and every sect has its own compilation. So this Revata Sutta then speaks of these 16 objects. And we cannot find such a sutra, neither in northern tradition nor southern tradition. And the most important of them are the first four. They explain the whole process of meditation. They are called so-called apya alambana. Apya means penetrating everything, including everything. When we study them, then we will get a clear picture why this concept of shamatha and vipassana has changed in the Buddhist tradition. And we have already mentioned the first two objects. These first two objects, they are called the mental image or reflected image. This word is also very illuminating, reflected image. Why? Because in this tradition, all comes from consciousness. All is included in the consciousness. And when you have understood the consciousness only reflects. Like a mirror. So in this tradition, actually, the realization is the transformation of consciousness which is dwelling to the consciousness which does not dwell anywhere. And that consciousness can reflect everything as it is. And because everything is based on consciousness, that consciousness on which everything is based, we have said, is called the alaya consciousness. Alaya means consciousness which dwells. That is why it is impermanent. The Buddha says in the Sandhi Nirmochana Sutra, which is most important sutra for this tradition, that he did not teach it to the disciples from the fear that they may hold it as a self. But it is impermanent. And what is impermanent cannot be the self. But in it is contained all of our experience. When you realize the nature of this consciousness, then it will turn to the wisdom of the great mirror. Everything is just reflected as it is. And this is the aim of shamatha and vipassana in this tradition. And shamatha and vipassana is, in a way, a explained in reference with the understanding of this consciousness. And this tradition explained that what the other tradition called the base consciousness, or what in Theravada is called the bhavanga, which literally means a cause of existence. Alaya is the cause of existence. Has exactly the same meaning. Now, as long as we have not the realization, direct realization of the ultimate reality, however you may call it. So to say, we are in the world of mental images. And they are called reflected images. So the meditation then, for those who have not yet had the experience of the ultimate reality, is all contained within these two objects. Now the situation changes when we have direct experience of the highest reality. And how it changes, we will have known the third object. And this third object is called Supianchi. Supianchi, Su means Vastu Paryanta, the everything which is everything included. All phenomena included. When we have the realization, all phenomena are included in it. And all phenomena means there are two aspects in this experience of the all phenomena. The aspect of this which is called yavat bhavikata, that means the aspect as far as the consciousness can go. Consciousness cannot go in differentiating beyond the 5 aggregates. Beyond the 12 spheres, beyond the 18 elements, beyond the dependent origination, beyond what is possible, what is not possible. These are called in this tradition the 5 objects of the upaya kaushalya, of the. They are not the ultimate reality, but they are the means for realizing the ultimate reality. They correspond to what the Theravada calls the objects of wisdom. First, we have to understand the object of wisdom, then we can penetrate their common characteristics, impermanence, unsatisfactory nature of impermanence, and the selflessness in impermanence. Then we can get the realization. Here we have the same ideas, only explained in a different way, different words. So clearly the roots are one. So when you have the realization, you understand how far the worldly consciousness cannot go beyond that. The differentiating consciousness. That's why yavat. Yavat means as far. And then the other is called yatha. Yatha means ru, the suchness. You realize how far the worldly consciousness can go, and you understand the suchness of this. And the suchness has two aspects, the worldly aspect and the ultimate aspect. The highest ideal is, especially emphasized in the northern tradition, is the unity of the relative truth and of the ultimate truth. This is the highest realization. And this is very, very difficult. For that, we have to contemplate one reality, the reality of suchness. That is why we recite the Heart Sutra. We learn the Transcendental Wisdom Sutras. They explain this one reality. And it is explained especially in early Buddhism, early Northern Buddhism, it is explained especially to the disciples, because their mind is pure, they can understand. For those whose minds are pure, it is not so difficult to understand the reality is one. But we who are still subjected to defilements, it is very difficult to understand. So in all Buddhist tradition, it is said that Buddha under the Bodhi tree first decided not to share his knowledge with us, because he thought it is just unspeakable, impossible to realize. We live in the worldly reality, but this worldly reality cannot be different from the ultimate reality. So the Agamas also say very clearly what is the difference between the enlightened man, between the wise, who have the pure mind, and us who are still subjected to defilements. The wise, they use these concepts the world is using, but they do not attach. Na upeti. Yacha loke. Samutyo na upeti vidu, no? It is how it is in Sutta Nipata. Yacha loke. Whatever concept there may be in the world, the wise one do not attach to them. Na upeti. This is from Sutta Nipata, which the Bhikkhu Bodhi has lately translated. So we all live in the worldly reality, but it implies that for the wise, this worldly reality is actually the ultimate reality. So if we get a realization, we know the limits of the differentiating mind, and we see these limits in the sense of suchness. No one can go beyond the suchness. So we have learned the object of Vipassana ultimately is also the suchness. What the mind differentiates is the suchness. When the mind does not differentiate, it also experiences suchness. The mind cannot go anywhere. It actually dwells in suchness. So, this is very deep idea, very difficult to realize. So the Daimon Sutra is teaching learning, practicing meditation means giving rise to the mind, not letting it dwell anywhere. This is all based on these ideas. Suchness is suchness because you cannot dwell on it. Because you cannot dwell on it, it is real. Now this is what we realize when we become enlightened. We not only have the worldly reality, but we see this worldly reality from the perspective of suchness, from the perspective of ultimate reality. In this tradition, nirvana is a synonym of suchness. So then, when you meditate on the real objects of differentiation and you meditate on their suchness, you get the ultimate realization, which is called Karya Nishpati. Karya Nishpati means the perfection in all what is to be done. And this implies a very, very wide training. Whatever is to be done, you attain the perfection in it. When you have really attained this idea, then the consciousness becomes just mirrors. And the individualizing consciousness, so-called manas, becomes the consciousness of sameness of all the phenomena. The mental consciousness becomes a beautiful observation, and the five consciousnesses become the consciousnesses of accomplishment. So this is the idea of a perfect state. And some way, always this understanding is in the background of, even when we speak of the practice of the Shravakas, you will find it is a background for understanding of that practice. So you, in other words, you use the suitable objects for getting perfection. You use the breath in order to get perfection in going beyond thinking, and this experience is very, very important. The real deep investigation of the mind starts when the mind stops thinking. This is very important experience in this tradition. And then in the Northern Buddhism, you will find in Chinese Chan, in the Tibetan tradition, in the Mahamudra, in the Taiyuanman, the great perfection. All these, then the meditation is based on this idea, on this understanding. In this tradition, as opposed to other Buddhist tradition, you don't have two realities, the conventional reality and the ultimate reality, the highest reality, but you have three realities. You have a completely illusionary reality, and this is a reality of our concepts, names, which bring the idea of self in things and in persons. So in a way we are deluded about the reality by the concepts. That's why we separate the conventional reality and the ultimate reality. When we do not do it, we are in suchness. And the concepts or the names, sentences, they call it names, sentences, syllables, all these are empty of content. They are empty of content, but yet they define our conventional reality. And what is the difference between the wise and us who are not wise? The wise are completely free from clinging to them, but what we cling to is actually this concept, the names, which are empty of content. This is to be realized in shamatha and vipassana. And the great opening for that is the experience of a non-thinking mind. The ultimate object of shamatha is precisely this non-thinking mind. So the shamatha becomes the actually opener of the ultimate reality. Then the vipassana differentiates in accordance with the suchness of things. You will find even in the explanation of the practice of the disciples, you will find these ideas at the background. So it is very important to see the whole. And to see the whole is very difficult. One has to read many times to see these connections, because they are explained in many different aspects. So Asanga has been criticized also for making things too complicated, but actually it is very rewarding to study it for developing wisdom. Because what is wisdom? Seeing things also from different perspectives, not just one. So the ultimate aim of shamatha and vipassana is this karya nishpati, perfection in whatever is done. And this perfection in whatever is done is actually only experienced fully by the Buddha himself. So whatever the Buddha does is a suchness. Whatever the Buddha speaks is a suchness. The other Buddhas, the Pratyeka Buddhas, the disciple Buddhas, they are close to this ideal, but still they have not reached this ideal. So the first thing you learn when you start studying the Northern Buddhism is love for the Buddha, devotion to the Buddha. And the Buddha actually means the suchness. So this is very different from the approach you will find. When we learn Theravada, we are mostly learning these concepts of the Abhidharma to understand. But here we are learning the love to Buddha. So you will find this even in the Agamas, in the Abhidharma, in Abhidharma Kosha. The faith we have mentioned is defined as love. So it has clearly the roots. Everything has roots. Nothing comes from nothing. So these are the four objects that one who practices the shamatha and vipassana is to experience as he advances in his practice. And this understanding in a way is very, very important. So the one who practices in the Northern tradition, he integrates from the very beginning the contemplation of the ultimate reality of the suchness into his practice. It is also very clearly explained in this book. And this book has even had influence you will find even in the Southern Buddhism, like Charita Pitaka. There is a book explaining the path of Bodhisattva. It uses a lot of material of this book from the Bodhisattva Bhumi. So when we then join the shamatha and vipassana, and we can do it on the basis of the 5 objects for purification of the conduct we have explained. I hope you still remember them. The Anapana is just one of them. If we use the Dharma, this is also emphasis of this. We use the Dharma as a skillful means, the ultimate Dharma is something you cannot hold, you cannot explain by words, you cannot differentiate. But in order to realize it, you have to differentiate correctly. So these objects of shamatha and vipassana, they are called the objects of purifying the conduct, and the objects of skillful means, and the object of worldly purification, and the object of the ultimate purification. So altogether 16 objects. Now how do you purify your conduct? In Buddhism we speak, especially in the Southern Buddhism, the 5 basic defilements. So you have the 5 objects for purification of the conduct. Everything then becomes complete. You get a complete picture. And this book wants to give you the complete picture about meditation. It does not mean that there are only 5 objects of to purify the conduct, but these 5 counter the 5 main defilements. So when we have the defilements of the grasping, defilement of passion, why we develop grasping? Because we contemplate the beautiful object. When we contemplate the beautiful object, because in our mind there are seeds of previous attachments, then we cultivate more attachment. So how to reduce this tendency of grasping? By contemplating the non-beautiful object. And in Buddhism it is explained that the suffering, the cause of suffering is grasping, thirst. Thirst for what? For enjoyment of the senses, for sensation. And we, so to say, we are cultivating the thirst if we contemplate the beautiful object that we like, that we want to possess. The worldly mind is a mind which wants to possess. So we contemplate the non-beautiful object. And this is explained in great detail in this book. And the early teachers of Mahayana, they have all taught this meditation and emphasized it very much. You will find it in Tajatalun, also described in great detail by Kumarajiva. You will find it in the Transcendental Wisdom Sutras. This is a basic meditation. Then, if we have a grasping, then we surely will have resistance. The resistance is connected with grasping. So the next object is the metta, the love. Love without, what is metta? What means metta? Friendliness. Friendliness means the love without grasping. When you have this love without grasping, you can get rid of the resistance, anger, hate. And included in this complex of resistance, very important to understand, is also many, many things we experience: the fear, the depression, the worries, all have roots in grasping. So when we have, according to the teachings of the Mahayana masters, actually the practice of love is the base for the bodhisattva practice. No practice of love, no bodhisattva practice. Because of love, great compassion. Great love, great compassion. Great compassion, love for Buddha. This is how the Buddha himself has practiced. By love for Buddha, he realized the Buddhahood. So when we do these practices thoroughly, then we this love and non-grasping, they become the suchness. They become the content of suchness. According to the teachers of Mahayana, the object of real love, the Buddha's love, is suchness. It is the object, so to say, on which you cannot hang the mind, without the sign of the object. So this is the karya nishpati. This is the realization of the love, realization of the non-attachment. They turn the mind to suchness, or by these practices it purifies the contact and you become closer and closer to suchness. Then another basic defilement is the pride. The pride is connected with the idea of the self. If there is no self, there cannot be pride. And the pride has very, very wide scope of meaning. When you think yourself inferior, when you think yourself superior, when you think yourself be anything at all, actually it is pride. And to counter this tendency of pride, which can become very strong, especially in the yogis who have some few attainments in yoga, some deep concentration. Then how you counter it? By meditating on the 6 elements, being the reality of the beings. The beings are composed of earth, water, fire, wind, space and consciousness. Nothing there can be object to pride. Then, of course, the ignorance, which is, so to say, the root of all defilements. And to counter ignorance, you meditate shamatha, you meditate vipassana on the dependent origination. And finally we come to the meditation on the breath. Meditation on the breath is so important in this tradition, and in all Buddhist traditions. All Buddhists agree that under the Bodhi tree the Buddha has recollected his experience of the dhyana, and then he used it for his realization. And in dhyana you experience the state of mind without thinking. Actually, meditation is, the dhyana is some very often translated as meditation, but actually when we say meditation, we believe we meditate on some concept, and we using maybe words to understand it, to penetrate it. But in dhyana, actually, eventually the language and the tendency to think goes away. So it is very important experience. And the object of dhyana can be with the sign or can be also without the sign. The ultimate dhyana has no object to grasp. So it is the object of realization. When there is no sign, nothing to grasp. When there is nothing to grasp, there cannot be desire. And where there cannot be desire and nothing to grasp, there is emptiness. So these are in all Buddhist tradition the gates to the ultimate. The dhyana or absorption in that which has no sign, which cannot be grasped, and which is empty. And we practice the worldly dhyana with the worldly object in order to realize this dhyana with objects that cannot be grasped. Now the time is over. We will come to these things again in the evening. explaining our meditation on the breath. But I hope with this background it becomes more clear. So now we can go to the questions again, otherwise we will get them accumulating. What is the effective way to overcome laziness? We have already covered this. The laziness, in order to overcome laziness, one has to have faith. If we don't have faith that there is something better than what we experience, then we will not put effort into our practice. When we don't have faith that our sensation is gross, and the gross sensation is connected with suffering, we will not put effort into our practice. Then, of course, in order to overcome laziness, we have to have desire for what we're doing. We have to have resolution for that. We have to have effort, will. The laziness leads to the sinking mind. Leads to boredom. So we have to be inspired. We are also lazy because we don't have happiness. So you have to gladden the mind, then the laziness goes away. Gladden, inspire the mind, make it enthusiastic. No more laziness. When no more laziness, this quality of clarity, relaxation can come. Because a laziness is the sign of grossness. This is very important to understand. We are lazy because we have grossness. If we have no grossness, we are not lazy. And from what the grossness comes, this Yogacara Bhumishastra explains very, very wonderfully, very clearly, very detailed analysis of grossness, 24 kinds of grossness. From the most grossness to the most subtle grossness. The grossness, the medium grossness, the subtle grossness, all is explained. And the grossness comes actually from grasping. This is not easy to understand. Is it good to take coffee to bring more concentration to the mind? Well, you have to know the right measure. This is also part of the science of Bhojane Matanyuta, the knowing the right measure in the food and in the drinks and so on. If we take too much coffee, it will only lead to excitement. If we take the proper measure, it may not, and it may help the meditation. The same with tea. China, very common before the meditation, drink tea. Now these 9 steps or dwellings of mind in shamatha belong to Yi Jie Ting. Actually, it is not exact. They don't belong to Yi Jie Ting. They are, so to say, explaining all thing, all states of Samadhi. Even when you have attained the dhyana, the mind will still have these subtle tendencies of thinking and the subtle tendencies of excitement. It's very, very difficult to remove them. So, in this tradition, the aim is a perfection. So, that's why the dhyanas are not explained as the content of the shamatha, but these 9 stages. When you can dwell in this 9th stage, you have attained the perfection, and you can apply it on the differentiated object, non-differentiated object. Without holding, and with perfect balance. This is the ideal. So the jhana, in a way, is only means for attaining this perfection in application of the mind to the object. Samadhi actually literally means the application of the to the object. From the Sanskrit root adana means application, sama, the equally, in balance and correctly. So that is why in the Buddhist tradition, the experience of the jhanas explains also the cosmology, the mind. Everything we experience is based on the mind. It's not just the Yogacara, it is the whole of Buddhism like that. And when we go to heaven, due to practicing some virtues, practicing concentration is also practicing virtue, if it is a correct concentration. Correct concentration means wholesome concentration. You can have unwholesome concentration. The teachers also speak of even of unwholesome mindfulness. Like a cat wants to grasp the mouse, is very, very mindful, but this is not a wholesome mind. The wholesome mind, wholesome mindfulness is with detachment. So belong to Yi Jie Ting, in which one can combine shamatha and vipassana. There is a difference in explanation, but actually the experience cannot be different. According to Northern tradition, we say practicing vipassana in samadhi. In Southern tradition, it is explained going out of samadhi and practicing vipassana. But actually, it is a same experience. There cannot be real difference. When you go out of, so to say, out, you actually observe the object which is object of Samadhi. So you can actually see the immediately preceding mind. Normally you cannot see immediately preceding mind. Only when you are in Samadhi you can do that. Can one also combine both in the jhanas or even in the formless meditative state? Yes, of course, you can combine. You go out of the jhana, but the object is still the object of the jhana. That's why this tradition speaks of the differentiated image and non-differentiated image. Finally, this knowledge leads to the knowledge that everything is just images in the mind. It is based on meditation. When you are in jhana, you are not affected by the outside objects. Then it is jhana. Because the mind has merged into the image. Explain please how plants, animals and inanimate objects are composed of 5 aggregates. Who said the inanimate object is composed of 5 aggregates? Nobody said that. That is your own idea. Actually only sentient beings and sentient beings in the sphere of senses, they are composed of the 5 aggregates. And in the sphere of subtle forms. Why? Because there is an object to grasp, which is rupa, the form. Then there is the reception of this object that is grasped, that is a sensation. Then there is the sign of the object, which is perception. Then there is a mind which goes to this object, that is the will, and the will formations, which the will coordinates. And finally there is a consciousness which has object to differentiate. So the 5 aggregates only belong to the sentient beings. This meditation hall has no consciousness. It cannot have 5 aggregates. About non-thinking, about non-thinking, a traditional saying is that it is not possible to be without thoughts, but one can be without wandering thoughts. Do you actually mean no thoughts? Yeah, of course, no thoughts. Why not? It's not so difficult to be without thoughts. And the practicing of meditation is helpful for that. When you enter the state free from thinking, then you can get some deep intuition into the nature of the mind. It is very important. You said that one can avoid being stuck in jhanas with supernatural power. Can you elaborate on that? Yes, I can elaborate on that a little bit. You can also study some scriptures, like Visuddhimagga, even like the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra. What happens when you are in jhana? You merge with the shamatha image you have cultivated in order to transcend the attractions of the five senses. So your mind dwells on this subtle image. That's why the subtle image is called rupa. And the sphere of mind which contemplates these subtle images is called the rupa dhatu. According to Buddhism, there are three spheres of existence, and beings, they find themselves in these three spheres of existence in accordance with the way of their perception. In our sphere of perception, also in the hells, among the animals, among the hungry ghosts, among the lower gods called devas, the perception is still bound to the object of the five senses, and is dominated by these objects. Then you have the higher sphere, where the attraction of the five senses is transcended, and the mind contemplates only the subtle forms, which are created by the mind. Then, if you practice these subtle forms, then you can experience the spheres beyond the form. There is a techniques for that. In this sphere beyond the form, there is no more, so to say, consciousness differentiating the form. So they are called formless. And the higher you go, the more subtle the perception becomes. And you can experience these. It is not so difficult. You can learn them. If you practice meditation, it is not so difficult. But to attain the perfection in these states is very, very difficult. We are very, very far from that. So when we practice them, we get more and more love for Buddha, for those who have perfected these states. Now, when you are in this conditioning of mind, contemplating the subtle image which it has created in meditation, then the mind cannot move because it is absorbed in that image. So what to do? Now the Buddha, we have learned, he has attained what he has attained with the help of supernatural powers, namely the divine eye and the seeing the past lives. How could he do it? He of course did it with the help of meditation, with the help of dhyana, but he learns to jump from one object into another, from one sphere of jhana into another sphere of jhana. This is called the jumping meditation. You find it in all Buddhist traditions. And through this jumping meditation, even so the mind has a power of the dhyana, it can change the object. One has to learn it Sometimes it happens spontaneously, but in the case of us who are not especially talented, we have to work on it very hard so that we attain this ability. Then you can use the mind with the power of the dhyana and change the objects. Then when you practice like contemplation of the different parts of the body and so on, with this powerful mind, it becomes, of course, much more clear. So one can change the object in dhyana when one has practiced these supernatural powers. And now the time is over, so let us fulfill our forms so that we can work well with the formless.